Kia ora, my name is Mix. I'm a first generation New Zealander. My parents are from England and Scotland. I grew up on the hills of Te Mata Peak and under the skies of the Herotanga Plains. I'm Pakeha and tangata Tiriti. I'm working on my te reo pronunciation, so please forgive any missteps there. I've been working on a project for the last 5 years that I think encaptures sort of some really interesting concepts about digital resilience or resilience more generally. It's quite different than the cloud approach that government's been taking. So the takeaways that I want you to leave with are that resilience is beyond the corporate cloud. That data created between people should be held between people, and that databases can be humanizing. So a little bit about this project. Where did it start? What is Ahau? Ahau is a Māori-led organization. It's been around for about 5 years. It's a small team, but we have a larger community that's supporting us in this mahi, and these are some of the people who are there around the start. We build software tools to support community coordination, and where that started is building a desktop and mobile application that, for example, allows you to build a whakapapa tree. This is some of my family tree, work in progress, and also record artifacts that are connected to that whakapapa tree. So these could be stories, they could be photographs, videos, documents, all sorts of things. And it allows you, the idea of this is to be able to navigate between, a whakapapa is not just made from a family tree. In Ahau, you can dive into a particular profile. So this is my mother. I found this story by looking at stories about Barbie, say. And this is my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. And in this way I could see that see her, click through and read more about my grandmother to understand more about my context and who I am. So, and the final thing it provides is a tribal registry. So, I mentioned that we've been working with a number of communities around New Zealand and building this. So, in talking to them, the requirements that we surfaced for building these particular tools are sovereignty, specifically data sovereignty, cultural safety. So by this I mean like the way that data is entered, who enters it, who's allowed to see it, what sort of data fields you record. All of these need to be appropriate to the community who's using it. Needs to be flexible, so different communities will want to record different sorts of information about people, so it needs to meet those needs. They'll have different cultural policies, so some groups will decide that these records should be viewable by everyone in a hapū. Some may say only for kaitiaki, so we want to be able to support that. Maintainable. This is about hardware, software, and the people. So if you're running your own infrastructure, for example, how many people know how to maintain that? If it was all set up by one person and they're the only person who knows how all of this works, what happens when that person leaves or has an accident or something like that? Accessible. Has to be accessible by the people. Other people, and there might be family that's overseas. There might be family that doesn't really have a reliable internet connection. Can this work without the internet? And recoverable, this is about if a data center or a center of data burns down, is the data gone? Did we have backups? I want to speak a little bit more about sovereignty and data sovereignty because I think it's something that a lot of people don't understand well, or a lot of Pakeha don't understand well. And I think this quote from Dr. Kanaitiana Tauru captures it really well. Our traditional knowledge teaches us that all natural objects have a wairua and a mauri, If our mauri is healthy, then our wairua is intact and will make the natural object healthy. Moreover, if we touch something, share our thoughts, or are involved with an event, then our mauri is left with that object or event. The same is also applicable to Māori data. Māori data contains mauri of the individual, whānau, hapū, and iwi. Therefore, any system that has Māori data then has people's mauri. If our data and mauri is being used for things that we are not aware of, stored overseas or in culturally unsafe environments, then this will impact the wairua, the health that is, which will in turn make the individual whānau, hapū, and iwi unhealthy. So this is particularly relevant in Te Ao Māori, but I think there's a growing awareness outside of just Māori that this is important, that how we handle data is important for people's well-being. So here's an article just from a week ago from Scientific American asking the question, could there be things that we could learn from Indigenous communities about data privacy? Could their work influence those fighting back against invasive apps? The article talks about data colonization or colonization digitally, and mentions Ahau's work and a number of other projects that we are partners with. Okay, so what does it look like? What's the solution that we came up with? We decided to build a peer-to-peer system, also called distributed system. So in this animation, we can see a number of peers who are represented with these cell phones are connecting to this, we call it a pātaka, which is like a storehouse in Te Reo. But it's also like it's a storehouse, but it's also a relay. And you can see that inside the storehouse, you can't actually read the records, so that's encryption happening. And the relay is just facilitating profiles, whakapapa, to be transmitted to people who are in the family. What this is also showing is that the data, the whakapapa data and these archival records are on the devices. That's not data that's being accessed from a website, that's actually living on the devices. So this currently looks a little bit like a centralized system, but where this shines is, we decide to stand up another one of these pātakas for backup purposes, for resilience against natural disaster. Then it just provides further redundancy such that if that pātaka up in Taranaki goes offline, data continues to flow amongst the family. So, so there's nothing particularly special about that server, that pātaka. It's just helping the family connect. Yeah. So if we look at the requirements that we started out with, in terms of sovereignty, the system is completely self-hosted. The self-hosting is happening on everyday computers. A pātaka doesn't need to be a fancy rack server. It can just be a cell phone, or it could be a laptop. And similarly with the places where you can read it, read the data and interact with the data, those can just be cell phones and laptops and desktops. In terms of the software, it's all open source. It's really important to us that if Ahau as an organization ceases to exist, that doesn't mean that the software dies. So open source means the source code is forever open and free, and anyone can, any community could take up the mantle of maintaining and extending that software. Culturally safe, as I said, the data is encrypted. That's at the transport level and at the record level. And in terms of cultural safety around cultural policies, we've built the application such that communities can decide what is public. Not all of those records may have been visible to every member of the community. It could be that some records are just for kaitiaki. Flexibility, I'm going to talk about that a lot later. Accessibility, it can be run on any computer. You don't need specialized hardware, and it works offline. So what do I mean by that? The data, just to remind you that the data is all held by the people who are part of the community. So I can go out into the WOP-WOPs and my phone will still be carrying the data, and I can look up and interact with my whakapapa and add new archives. So this has interesting properties, like you don't actually need the internet for the system to work. You could go to the marae. The data will replicate between peers that are recognized to be part of the same family, and then you can take it anywhere. Like, so you can maintainable. As I said, it's free and open source software. This is important for maintenance. It means many people can contribute, and it can be installed on any device, so there's no specialized hardware. Recoverable, because the data is replicating, it's backed up by default. It's backed up in your community. This isn't vaporware. It's already in use in New Zealand. We've got a community that we're working with up in Northland called Whangaroa Hapü, I'm going to talk a bit about later, and a number of other communities. We've also got people self-starting, so they've found the software, have one guy in particular who's updating his whakapapa of 1300 ancestors, and we've been supporting him we've added features to the software to make it possible for him to print that out. So they want to put it along the wall of their marae. It's going to be 20 meters wide. It's also in use outside of New Zealand. This is a recent Earth Defenders Toolkit gathering in Guyana. This was a gathering in Ecuador, but there were people from Guyana, from Brazil, from First Nations up in Canada, Turtle Island. And Ahau was one of a suite of tools included in mini PCs that were sent out in about 20 different communities around the Americas now. But it's not just for Indigenous people. We've had a number of people in Australia, Germany, Sweden interested in what we're doing, and this is me translating the New Zealand English into sort of an international English. So realize that some words like whakapapa were stumbling blocks for some of our foreign friends. Part 2, I'm going to talk about pluralism. So by building peer-to-peer, we're building a sort of inherently pluralistic system, and that's not just like the data is in multiple places. It has lots of interesting challenges and lots of implications. And I would argue that it makes the system more human. So one of the challenges is how do you address something or reference it when it lives in many places, it's on many devices? So unlike a website like Flickr or Google or whatever, you can't just have a website address, like a URL that you can just send people to. So how do you reference things? The answer is content addressable storage. So a quick overview of this technical concept is that there's this process by which you can take any document, like a plain text document or a video or whatever, apply this technique, and you get this unique short string of letters and numbers and characters. And the behavior of this hashing function is such that if any word or letter or pixel of a video is modified, this unique ID will change. So this is really neat. It means that I can ask a peer, can I have a photo of my grandmother and her daughters, please? And they can know exactly which one I'm referencing and send it to me. And further, when I receive it, I can reperform this hashing and prove for myself that the photo that I asked for is exactly the photo that I have received and that it hasn't been tampered in any way. In a system so sometimes peer-to-peer systems are called gossip systems because information can come from a party that didn't author it. So an example of that would be saying, I've heard from my sister that my dad said his grandfather's name was Lawrence. So I'm receiving information that's now sort of secondhand. In a human system, we sometimes call this as sort of like we've got this like game called telephone, if you've ever played that. And typically, you're not sure if you can, the information can degrade. Hashing helps solve that because we know that the information hasn't degraded. But how do we know that my sister remembered what my father said correctly, or hasn't? Maybe she's remembered wrongly who wrote that. So for this we use cryptographic signatures. This is kind of the digital equivalent of a signature on a piece of paper. It's every information comes with a signature from who authored it, and this allows us to verify and trust who said it, not just what was said. Concurrent editing is another challenge. So if you've used Google Documents, concurrent editing is like many people collaborating on a document at the same time. In a peer-to-peer system, this is a real challenge because people are maybe offline while they're editing, or they may be at different ends of a country and they push send, and it takes a moment for the peers to go, oh, I've got a new update, swap information, and discover that you may have edited the same record at the same time. So we use this approach called conflict-free replicated data types. And this is a whole area of study which is super fascinating, but I won't go into so much right now. A further challenge that we have over something like Google Documents is how do we order things without a shared clock time? So what I mean by that is when you're sorting out a bunch of edits on something, it's important to know in what order they happened. In Google, they have a single computer, for the sake of this argument, that records a time, and when people make edits, those times are registered. In our system, we don't have that. We don't have a single clock in the middle or a single server in the middle that's coordinating things. And we cannot trust the times that people's computers record things, because maybe my computer's, there's something broken on it and it hasn't updated with daylight savings, and that would put my edits in a really weird order, which then messes up records. And so that's the sort of like happy case of a mistake. The unhappy sort of malicious case would be I deliberately changed the clock on my computer in order to sort of time travel and set myself up as an admin or some sort of authority to give myself permission. So how do we get around that? We use causal ordering. So when we have these edits, so this is someone says, here's a profile, it's Mix. Mix's birthday is April, says someone else. Mix's birthday was in April 1984, says another person. Each of these edits points back to the previous edit, and it doesn't use time at all. It just uses those unique hash IDs to reference the edits. And the interesting property of those hash IDs is they're very hard to guess, basically impossible to guess ahead of time. So these arrows can't be made up. They can only reference things that are already known to exist. So they can only point backwards in time. Here's what a concurrent edit looks like. This could be one peer saying Mix was born in 1984. This one says Mix was born in 1980. So in this case, two people have edited the same piece of information, but they didn't know that the other was editing. And now in this particular case, we have a conflict because these are in different states of opinion about a particular piece of record. And this could be a kaitiaki coming in and pointing back to both of these and saying, I'm acknowledging that there's been a conflict, and I'm going to now resolve that conflict and say that it was actually 1984. I'm really fascinated with this. It has some really interesting side effects, like the system works if you're traveling at relativistic speeds or in space, or lets you travel to Mars and come back and everything still works. Time's a fascinating topic. I want to talk about some other implications of this. So we talked about this distributed nature and how data doesn't have addresses. Another way of saying this is that data lives between us. Data lives with us, and we're not accessing the data from someone else. So this is a lot more resilient than an API, because with an API, you're sort of knocking on a door and saying, or a website, you're knocking on a door and saying, can I have that data, please? And at any point, that website could break. That API could break, or the API could change. People could say, actually, you have to pay money for this API right now. This is the case is actually unfolding on Reddit at the moment. Reddit has changed its API so that it's prohibitively expensive for people to use, and the community is currently imploding. All of our records are collaborative by nature. I think this is really interesting. Collaborations, as we've seen, can lead to sort of conflicts. We've built in systems which let kaitiaki, or different people who have been assigned to be authorities, resolve different conflicts. So conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. It's differences of opinion, and systems need to account for that. So our truth is emergent and supports this sort of pluralism. And pluralism isn't always like a which one wins. We've got this like divergent state. Actually, divergent state can be preserved and honoured. So in a case of, in this particular image, I'm showing whangai links. So whangai means, in Te Ao Māori, is kind of like adoption, but within a family. So here we can see a child was born, this child was born to this person here, but they've been whangai'd over to this firstborn here. And in this particular graph, so those are two truths that are not mutually exclusive. But in this particular graph, the truth that we have decided to present is that this child here was closer to this. We're showing them as closer, and closeness could mean lots of things. It could mean inheritance. It could mean access to different sorts of records, that sort of thing. So, and this is interesting because intersubjective truth means truth that is decided amongst a group of people, and is down to their subjective opinions, perspective about what is relevant. So Ahau is flexible in that it supports these plural truths and presenting and exploring information in a way which is relevant to that particular community. So it could be that there's another sort of in pluralism is that some aspects of records may be only visible to some people, so kaitiaki or the wahine or something like that. So it could be that the phone number of this person is not visible to anyone but kaitiaki, or it could be that this relationship here is not known to anyone but the kaitiaki. Another really nice side effect of our system is that all of our truths, all of our records have their own whakapapa. We said another way that the records are built up of these graphs of interactions between many people. We know who they were. We can understand how conflicts were resolved. So this is very different than a centralized system or a corporate cloud, where systems tend to be built in a way which doesn't support this sort of pluralism. And there might be sort of like federation, like but the backups are sort of copies, and the systems are built in a much simpler way to sort of support singular truths, and this can be really dehumanizing. So part 3 is about sovereignty, or maybe rangatiratanga. So I want to talk about the Whangaroa Papa Hapü I mentioned. They're a community that is going into a treaty settlement process with the Crown, one of the requirements of that is that the Papa Hapü has to provide a tribal registry, a list of members of the Papa Hapü. So the Papa Hapü is made up of 22 different Hapü, I think, and the Papa Hapü wants to honour the rangatiratanga of each of those Hapü. And so the process that they're running is that each of these Hapü is being set up with a group that they will manage and own themselves and hold the data of themselves. And within that, they can build their own whakapapa tree, arranged as they see fit with the cultural policies that are appropriate to them. And that will be their definition of who is in the Hapü. The information that is shared up to the Papa Hapü is not that whakapapa tree, because that is not culturally appropriate in their context. All the Papa Hapü gets is a list of names. So, looking at that through the lens of that list of requirements, this supports like sovereignty in the right places for this community. It's culturally safe, and I think those are the two most main points for this particular example. But where this leads us is, in some senses, this is a definition of identity, and we're not used to thinking of sort of institutional identity credentials such as this passport of mine, which lets me, it's issued by, looks like DIA is the authority, it says, who authored this. And this is a trusted entity, DIA, that lets, and such that I can, go into a bank or approach a university about attending, and they would accept this as a credential that they would trust. Whangaroa Papa Hapü is generating a list of names which the Crown has said that they can trust. It's not much of a step further to say, well, if the Papa Hapü is allowed to, issue these credentials about who's part of the Papa Hapü, and the Crown trusts that, and we trust the Crown or the state, then the bank should trust the definition that, or the attestation that so-and-so is part of this Papa Hapü. And yes, please, let's open a bank account or apply to join a university, whatever. So this is something that Ahau is currently working on. DIA is working on digital identity, verifiable credentials, and we have a grant that we're working on at the moment, exploring this, which is really exciting. But why can't we go further? If we look at where is data and identity, sort of aspects of identity being held, I have a current. It's a long running project for me around accessing my banking data. I want to build interfaces which let me understand how I'm interacting with money, allow me to dream and plan with money and coordinate with other people with money. My bank has an API, Kiwi Bank has an API, but they won't give access to it. People have reverse engineered their API to build such tools, but I'm not, and the condition of using those tools is giving my password to them, which is, not appropriate at all. Why would I, you can revisit all of those sovereignty and privacy, safety concerns. So why is it that I cannot access data that I created in partnership with the bank? Why is it that it's behind an API or behind a website which I have to ask for permission to? What happens if they decide to change the website or it goes down? Do I just lose that? I feel like the data should be held by both of us. And the same can be said for the healthcare system, education, and Real Me. Examples from healthcare. I've lived in a number of cities. I've had a number of different dentists. Each time I visit a new dentist, they're like, well, let's set a baseline. We'll give you an x-ray. And then they inevitably ask me a question like, oh, is this area of your teeth, it looks like there's been a bit more wear and tear. Is that a new thing, or is that like historically that happened in childhood or something like that? And I'm not sure. I'm not a particular expert. I don't but why am I not carrying that information with me? I can manually ask each of my dentists to give me the data, but it should be a living, ongoing process of sharing of data, consensual sharing of data, that I can give access to that history that I'm carrying with me to future healthcare providers. So, to close again with those takeaways, resilience is beyond the corporate cloud. The corporate cloud can help us out, but it's not sufficient. Data created between people should be held between those people, and that databases, built right, can be humanizing. So if you'd like to learn more about any of this, we've got a lot of information on our website at ahau.io. And if you'd like to get in touch, we have an open chat channel that you can join, or feel free to get in touch with me via email. Thanks very much.